20 years ago, an entire family vanished during a summer road trip. No bodies, no wreckage, no clues. Only one survivor was ever found, a bruised, barefoot child lying alone on a highway with no memory of what happened. That child was me. Before we go deeper, tell us in the comments, which city are you watching from? If you stand for truth, justice, and uncovering the past, tap the like button. And make sure you subscribe so you do not miss a single part of this true crime style mystery. Now, back to where it all begins. My name is Aaron Vale, and for most of my life, I have lived with a question that no one can answer. What happened to my family? I was 7 years old the last time I saw them. It was supposed to be a simple road trip. My father, Michael, was meticulous with planning. And every summer, we would escape the city and head toward the forests near Yosemite. He called it our reset. We packed snacks, maps, an old camera. My mom sang along to the radio. My sisters, Lena and Maya, argued over what songs to play. I sat in the back seat with my toy robot and no idea that life was about to rip itself in half. We never made it to the woods. The next memory I have, the only memory, is waking up in a hospital bed, confused, bandaged, and completely alone. Police said a truck driver found me lying on a desolate stretch of highway. I had no ID, no shoes, just a scratch on my cheek and my father's name stitched into the back of my shirt. My family's SUV, gone. Not a scrap of metal or a skid mark to suggest they had ever existed. Investigators searched forests, rivers, side roads, nothing. It became one of California's strangest missing persons cases. Eventually, they gave it a label, presumed dead, and me. I was raised by my grandparents, shielded from the cameras and whispers. I grew up with a haunted past I could not remember. The headlines faded. The world forgot. But I never stopped wondering, never stopped feeling like something or someone was still out there. July 8th, this year, exactly 20 years since that trip. I had not planned to commemorate it. What is there to commemorate? No gravestone, no remains. Just a scar on my childhood and a silence I had learned to live with. But at 4:08 a.m., I woke from the same dream again. A flash of headlights, screeching tires, my mother's voice crying my name, and then the silence. And then I heard something real. A dull thud at my apartment door. Not a knock, not footsteps, just one soft impact, enough to make me sit upright in bed. I stepped out into the dark hallway. No one there, only a single brown package resting neatly at my door. No return address, no label except for my own name, typed cleanly across the center. I carried it back inside, heart hammering. I had not received a package in weeks. I opened it carefully. Inside, wrapped in crinkled wax paper, was a single roll of undeveloped 35mm film. My throat went dry. On the edge of the paper, a handwritten date, July 8th, 2005. The day they vanished, I stared at it for a long time, hardly able to breathe. I remembered that camera, my father's old Canon. He brought it everywhere, snapping photos of everything from road signs to squirrels. The camera was never recovered. Neither were the photos. So how did this roll survive? And more importantly, who sent it to me? This was no mistake. Someone knew something. I did not wait. I threw on a jacket, grabbed my wallet and keys, and drove through the fog-thick streets of Seattle, guided by one thought: I need this film developed now. I reached the edge of the old industrial district just after dawn. There was only one place I knew of, the Black Room, a fading photo lab that still processed analog film. It was sandwiched between a boarded-up bar and a vacant furniture warehouse. Inside, the scent of developer chemicals clung to the air. The walls were lined with dusty shelves and old cameras that looked like relics from the Cold War. The man behind the counter looked up, mid-60s, gray hair, wireframe glasses. He raised an eyebrow. You shoot this yourself? I shook my head and handed over the roll. It's from my father, I said. Can you develop it? He studied the date on the film. Something shifted in his expression. This is old, he said. Might be degraded. Could take a while. I'll wait, I told him. He nodded and disappeared behind a heavy black curtain. I sat on a cracked vinyl bench near the wall. My leg bounced. My heart kept racing. For 20 years, I had gone through every police file, every interview, every conspiracy theory. I had built timelines, mapped the route they were supposed to take, even visited rest stops they might have passed. But I had never held a single piece of physical evidence, until now. And I could not shake the feeling that this roll of film, this forgotten piece of the past, was about to tear open everything I thought I knew. I sat in that shop for nearly 2 hours. I do not remember looking at my phone once. I just stared at the floor, listening for footsteps, for anything. Finally, the shopkeeper emerged from the dark room, holding a small envelope. His face was unreadable. Some of them came out better than I expected, he said quietly. He handed it to me and turned away. I held the envelope for a second. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried the weight of a ghost. Then I opened it. The first few photographs were exactly what I expected. Blurry shots of roadside trees, a family car parked beside a gas station, my sisters laughing in the back seat. Normal, happy, mundane. But then, things changed. One photo showed my father at a gas pump, looking toward the camera, but in the background, slightly out of focus. A man in dark clothing stood still beside a black SUV, watching. Another shot was at a diner. My mother was sitting in a booth. Her eyes stared directly into the lens. But they were not smiling eyes. They were wide, alarmed. Something or someone had unsettled her. In the next photo, she was glancing over her shoulder, toward the window, and the final image, blurry, tilted, likely taken in a rush. It showed the same black SUV, parked, occupied. Watching us, my hands began to tremble. This was no longer just memory. This was evidence. This was a message from the past, or from someone who had never wanted the truth to come out. I took the photos, left the shop, and stepped back into the cold morning air. Somewhere, someone had tried to erase my family. And now, for the first time in 20 years, I had a lead. I drove straight home with the envelope clutched in one hand and my thoughts spiraling in 10 directions at once. The photographs lay on the passenger seat beside me, shifting slightly with every turn, like they were eager to be seen again. I did not need to look at them. I had already memorized the details. My mother's anxious eyes, the black SUV lingering. In the background, the faceless man standing too still in every frame he appeared in. This was not paranoia. This was pattern. Whoever was watching us on that trip had done it with intention. Back at my apartment, I spread the photos across my desk beneath a dim lamp, beside the dusty folders of police reports and archived news clippings I had gathered over the years. I looked again at the image of the diner. My mother was seated in a booth by the window, half turned toward the camera, her gaze unfocused but filled with urgency. In the reflection of the glass, if you looked carefully enough, there was another man standing outside, a silhouette with no face, only posture, watching through the window like he was waiting for something. My father was next to her, stiff-jawed, mid-sentence, like he had just told her they were leaving. My hand moved to the police case file, flipping through to the timeline from 2005. According to official records, their last confirmed stop had been a gas station off Route 120 that matched one of the photos. But the diner, it was not in the report. It had never been documented. I turned back to the images. The neon sign above the door was blurred, but the logo on the coffee mugs inside gave it away, a place called Ridgeview Grill. I searched for it online. Still there, same logo, same location. A 2-hour drive northeast of here. That was where I needed to go next. I stuffed the photos into a folder, grabbed my notebook, and got back in the car. The road felt colder this time, even though the sun had started to rise. Every turn reminded me of something buried, a half-memory, a wordless warning. When I reached the Ridgeview Grill, the gravel parking lot was mostly empty. The building looked almost identical to the one in the photo. Faded red siding, chipped white trim, a flickering open sign in the window. Inside, the smell of old coffee and fried bacon drifted through the air. I walked slowly to the counter. A woman in her 60s, wearing a faded apron, was wiping down a pot. She looked up with a practiced smile, then froze slightly as her eyes landed on me. "You need something?" she asked. I pulled out the photo and laid it on the counter, pointing to the booth where my family had once sat. "That was taken here, in this diner, 20 years ago." She leaned in, her smile disappearing. Her eyes lingered on the image, then shifted to my face. "You're the boy," she said softly. "The one they found on the highway." I nodded. "My name is Aaron Vale. I'm trying to find out what happened to them." She took a shaky breath, then motioned to the stool. "I remember your dad. He came in looking tense. Real tense. They were halfway through breakfast when this man showed up. Dressed sharp, expensive suit. He sat 2 booths down, didn't order anything, just watched. Eventually, your dad got up and spoke to him. They stepped outside, argued for maybe 5 minutes. When he came back in, he looked like he had seen a ghost. Told your mom they had to leave. Right then, I swallowed hard. "Did you hear what they were arguing about?" She shook her head. "Too far to hear, but your dad was shaken." I never forgot it. And there was another man too. He didn't come inside. He just stood by the window, watching. "Did he leave when my family did?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Got into a black SUV. Same one in your photo, I think. Followed them when they pulled out." My hands tightened on the photo. This was confirmation. They were being followed, possibly hunted. This was not some random act. Someone was tracking them across the state. I stood to leave. The woman called after me. "Be careful, son. You go digging too deep. You might find something that does not want to be found." Her words followed me back to the car. I took one last look at the photo of my mother, her face turned halfway to the window, sensing something the rest of us missed, and whispered to the empty seat beside me, "I'm not stopping." But what I did not know then was that someone else had already realized I was looking, and they were about to remind me that I was not supposed to. The buried van, what did the police miss in those woods that someone wanted hidden forever? I returned to Seattle with more than I expected. A confirmed sighting, an eyewitness account, and evidence that my family was being followed in the hours before they vanished. The Ridgeview Grill was not listed in the original investigation. It was never in the reports. But now, thanks to that photo and the woman behind the counter, I had something the police never had, a trail. I needed help, and there was only one person I could think of. His name was Malcolm Raines, the former detective who led the investigation into my family's disappearance. He retired 5 years after the case went cold. Some say guilt drove him out. Others claim he simply gave up. I found him in a small house on the outskirts of Olympia, behind an overgrown lawn and a broken mailbox. He opened the door slowly, tall, weathered, and reluctant. "You're him," he said before I even spoke. "The kid from the highway." I nodded and showed him the photo from the diner. "I found this roll of film on my doorstep. It's from the day they disappeared. The case missed something. I'm going back through everything." He studied the photo, his face tightened. Then, without a word, he stepped aside and let me in. The inside of his house looked like a crime board had exploded. Stacks of old files, maps pinned to cork, boxes labeled with years and locations. He had not given up. He had just been waiting for something new. "I always believed there was more to it," he said, motioning to a stack of old evidence photos. "No wreckage, no signs of a crash, no blood. Just you, found miles off route, unconscious, but alive." I opened the original police timeline and pointed to a 911 log entry I had overlooked before. There was a 6-second emergency call from my mother's cell phone at 7:43 p.m. the night they disappeared. It was dismissed back then because the signal dropped before dispatch could trace it. Raines nodded slowly, but we had a general location, a forest reserve east of Route 120. Nothing came from the search. No van, no tracks, nothing. I leaned in. "Then we need to go back. You checked it once, but not with me." He stared at me for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Pack warm. It gets cold out there." We drove that same night, reaching the edge of the forest by sunrise. The path into the woods was overgrown and barely drivable, so we parked and continued on foot. Each step forward felt heavier than the last. The forest was damp with morning fog, shadows stretching between the trees like long, quiet warnings. It had been 20 years, but nothing looked disturbed. Then rain stopped suddenly. "There," he muttered, kneeling at a patch of uneven earth beneath an old pine. He brushed away the layers of moss and rotted leaves. Something metallic caught the light. He pulled it out slowly. A rusted, bent license plate. My heart dropped. The numbers were barely visible, but I did not need to see them. I already knew. California plate. The last numbers read 6 DVE for 20. My family's van. I knelt beside him, hands shaking. This was it, the first piece. It had been buried deliberately, hidden, erased. "Someone came back here," Rains said quietly. "Someone wanted to make sure no one ever found this." We dug deeper and found more. A broken mirror, a piece of seat upholstery, fragments of glass. Proof. The van had been here, not crashed, not abandoned, hidden, and someone had done it carefully. I looked around, eyes scanning the tree line. Why bring it all the way out here unless you want it forgotten? Rain stood, brushing off his jacket. Because your father wasn't just running from something. He was being hunted. We kept searching. The trees thickened, the trail vanished, and silence settled again until we found the cabin. It was hidden, among the brush, weathered and collapsing at the corners, an old hunting shack, maybe 40 feet wide, but the second I stepped near it, I felt it something wrong. The door was half hanging on one hinge. Inside was dark and damp, the air heavy with rot. Rain stepped in first, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room. Dust, empty crates, ripped fabric, a mattress covered in mold. Then something small caught his attention. Near the fireplace, half buried in grime, lay a spent bullet casing. He picked it up and turned it slowly in his palm. "This is close range," he said. .38 caliber, not for hunting. I crouched beside him. My father had a .38 revolver. He didn't. Bring it on the trip. Rains nodded grimly. Then someone else did. I scanned the room again and spotted something fluttering near the window. A torn strip of cloth caught on a rusty nail, faded blue with a tiny white floral pattern. My chest tightened. I reached for it. My hands trembled as I turned it over. It was soft, worn, familiar. My sister Maya had worn a dress with this exact pattern the day we left. This cabin wasn't just a dump site. They had been brought here, at least for a while. Before I could process that, my phone buzzed in my pocket. No caller ID, just a message. 6 words. "Stop digging. This ends with you." I showed it to Rains. His jaw tensed. "You were right," he said. "Someone's been watching, and now they know you're close." The forest was no longer quiet. It felt like it was holding its breath. We left fast, taking the evidence and heading back toward the car. My mind was spinning. If the van was buried here, if the dress was real, if the bullet casing matched the weapon my father once owned, then this was no longer speculation. This was proof. And now I had the attention of whoever spent 20 years trying to keep it buried, the man in the suit who was my father really running from. And did he know we would never escape? We drove back from the forest without saying much. The silence in the car felt heavier than the discovery itself, like the woods had not just given up a piece of the past, but had sent something else home with us. I stared at the torn fabric in my hand, turning it over again and again, my mind stuck on one impossible idea. They had been alive when I was found. All this time, I had believed my family had been lost on that road, but now I knew the truth. They were taken, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure no one ever found them. At Rain's apartment, we laid out the evidence. The license plate, the shell casing, the fabric, and the photos. He brought out a box of old records from the case, marked in red ink, dismissed, inconclusive, no trace. I opened a file labeled vehicle sightings, and there it was. A black SUV reported at the gas station off Route 120, mentioned once in a witness statement, but it had never been followed up. Rains frowned. We never tracked that vehicle. Couldn't confirm the plate. The report got buried. I looked at the diner photo again, the SUV visible through the window. We need to find out who owned that car. Rains picked up his phone and called a contact at the DMV. It took half the day, but eventually the results came through. The black SUV had been registered to a man named Gerald Kincaid, a businessman with no criminal record at the time, but a name that had surfaced in later federal databases linked to fraud, money laundering, and organized trafficking. Kincaid had vanished from the public eye in 2010, and no one had looked for him since. I opened a background report. My pulse spiked. Kincaid once held shares in a financial firm called Hartwell and Brine, the same firm where my father, Michael Vale, had worked. I turned to Rains. This is not a coincidence. My father worked in finance. He handled accounts, audits, offshore transfers. What if he found something? What if he saw names he was not supposed to? Rains leaned back, his eyes narrowing. Then this was never about a carjacking or random crime. Your father was a liability. My hands clenched into fists. I had always believed my father was a victim, but now I had to ask the question I had been too afraid to ask. What if he was the reason? I pulled out a folder of my father's employment history, traced his final emails, and found a name buried in one of the last messages. Clay Rourke, a senior partner at Hartwell and Brine, retired in 2007 and living outside the city. Rains and I drove to his property the next morning. It was isolated, upscale, and guarded by a front gate that opened only after we explained who we were. Rourke met us at the door, tall and composed, with eyes that had seen too much. I handed him a photo of my father. Michael Vale, you worked with him? Rourke gave a long, slow nod. Yes, we started around the same time. He was good, too good. I stared at him. What happened to him? Rourke hesitated. Then he turned and walked inside. We followed. He poured a drink, sat down, and sighed. Michael came to me a month before the disappearance. He had uncovered a laundering channel buried in the offshore accounts. Shell companies tied to private arms deals, human trafficking, political payouts. The firm was being used as a front. Did he report it? I asked. No, Rourke said. He was planning to go to the FBI. But the closer he got to the truth, the more paranoid he became. He told me they were being watched, that he had started getting threats. Emails, voicemails, even letters left at the office. He thought he was protecting his family by staying quiet, but eventually he made a choice. He pulled everything he had, encrypted it, and said they were leaving town. I stared at the floor. He was trying to disappear. Rourke nodded. He said he just needed time, that the truth would come out eventually. He took a backup of the evidence with him. I never saw him again. I leaned forward. You were telling me he had proof that could take these people down. He did, Rourke said. But if you are still looking, you are not the only one. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. Another message. Too late to stop, too close to survive. I turned the screen toward Rains. They are still watching. Rains stood. Then we need to find Kincaid. We ran his name through every known registry, pulled bank traces, looked for property records until finally, one flagged under an alias in eastern Montana, a compound, isolated, gated, registered to a shell corporation, formerly linked to known trafficking operations, abandoned, or at least that was the official story. We booked a flight and drove straight out to the listed address, arriving just before dark. The property sat on a dead-end gravel road, surrounded by decaying trees and rusted fencing. There were no signs of life, no lights, no movement. But something about the place felt too still. I stepped out of the car, staring at the silent compound that might have once held my mother and my sisters. If my father knew this was coming, I whispered, why didn't he stop it? Rains said nothing, because the truth was already clawing at the edge of my mind. Maybe he tried. Maybe they just got to him first. Blood in the shadows, what happens when you find the man responsible, and he is still waiting for you. The compound loomed ahead of us, like a forgotten scar in the woods, old fencing bent inward by time. Two structures resting at the edge of the trees. A main building with boarded-up windows and a smaller outbuilding that looked like it had not seen life in years. The gravel beneath our boots crunched too loudly in the silence. Rains walked ahead, hand resting on the grip of his sidearm, while I held the camera photos pressed against my chest like they could anchor me. The last time I had felt this cold was the morning I woke up alone on that highway. But now I was not dreaming. This place was real. We circled the perimeter, looking for signs of recent activity, but the doors were unlocked and creaked open under their own weight. Inside the main house, dust covered every surface. The living room had been stripped. No furniture, no curtains, only impressions left in the grime where objects had once rested. On the floor, we found scuff marks, deep ones, scrapes that looked like something heavy had been dragged. This wasn't abandoned, Rains muttered. This was cleared. We moved room by room, flashlights cutting through the darkness. In the back bedroom, something stopped me. A cot pushed into the corner. Thin metal frame, an old blanket, soft blue, almost childlike, folded neatly at the foot. I stepped closer. The pattern on the fabric was faint, but it was familiar. My mother had owned this kind of blanket. I remembered it from our living room back home, the one she kept on the couch during movie nights. The fact it was here turned my blood cold. They had brought her here, at least for a time. In the hallway closet, Rains found a small storage box under a floorboard. Inside were two things: a photo ID of a woman, eyes bruised, expression blank, and a worn bracelet shaped like a daisy. I picked it up slowly, my chest tightening. It belonged to Maya. She had made it during a summer camp. I remembered watching her tie the beads, one by one, while humming under her breath. This place was not just a hideout. It was a holding site. But for how long, and for what purpose? Before we could process the weight of what we were seeing, the door behind us slammed shut. Then everything went black. I woke up with my head pounding and my wrists bound to a metal chair in the middle of a narrow room. A dim bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly. The air smelled of rust and mold. Across from me stood a man older than the last time I had seen him in those old surveillance photos, but unmistakable. Gerald Kincaid. He wore a dark coat, his face calm, but his eyes held the dead weight of someone who had done terrible things without regret. "Aaron Vale," he said quietly. "I expected you sooner." I stayed silent. He circled the room slowly. "Your father thought he could outsmart everyone, that he could run, disappear, and hide the evidence. But he was naive, and naive people get other people hurt." He stopped behind me. "Your mother, ... she was strong. I will give her that. But in the end, strength means nothing without leverage." My jaw clenched. "What did you do to them?" He stepped in front of me again. "Your father had the documents. Offshore accounts, names, and more importantly, proof that we were moving people through the very firm he worked for. We could not let that leak." I stared at him. "You killed him." Kincaid tilted his head. "That was never the plan. He was worth more alive. But he forced our hand, so we made the decision for him." I thought of the bullet casing in the cabin, the broken glass, the blood that had never been found. Kincaid continued. "Your mother and sisters were transferred, temporary holding. After that, ... they were split up. That is all you need to know." I shook my head. "You're going to tell me everything?" He laughed once. "You think I'm afraid of you?" A noise cut through the silence. Gunfire, sharp and close. The light above flickered. Kincaid stepped back, startled. The door burst open, and Rains appeared with blood on his sleeve and a sidearm raised. Step away from him. Kincaid lunged, but Rains was faster. One shot to the shoulder, and Kincaid dropped, cursing and grabbing at the wound. Rains cut the ropes at my wrists. "Come on," he growled. "We are not dying here." We dragged Kincaid outside, where sirens in the distance confirmed that Rains had made the call before we entered the compound. Within minutes, law enforcement swarmed the place, taking Kincaid into custody. He screamed as they shoved him into the back of a van. "It won't matter," he yelled. "You are already too late." I stood in the dirt, hands shaking, eyes scanning the woods. Somewhere out there, My sisters had been taken from this place and moved again. Rains walked over, holding something in his hand. A USB drive. Found this in his coat. Might be what your father left behind. We gave the drive to the FBI the next morning. It contained encrypted files, emails, financial transfers, account ledgers tied to international trafficking rings, and buried references to Project Dandelion, a name that meant nothing to us at the time, but made one of the federal agents go pale. Kincaid's arrest led to raids in 3 states. Properties were seized, shell companies collapsed, but none of that mattered to me, not yet, because even with all that noise, one voice still had not been heard. My sister Dot, the survivor, what if one of them escaped, and has been waiting for me to find her all along? 2 days after the raid on the Montana compound, I found myself sitting across from a wall of government suits and federal agents in a cold conference room in Sacramento. The fluorescent lights hummed above us, and on the table sat the encrypted USB drive we had pulled from Gerald Kincaid's coat, the last thread left by my father. A digital vault of names, wire transfers, passwords, and property records that reached beyond anything I imagined. The FBI had confirmed what I already knew. This was not just a criminal network. This was a system layered, protected, rooted deep in corporations and offshore accounts, tied to human trafficking, black market, finance, and international weapons deals. And somehow, my father had found the tip of it 2 decades ago. Now that Kincaid was in custody, the rest of the organization was beginning to crack. Raids were underway in Nevada, Colorado, New York. More names were being pulled into the light. But for all the noise, my focus stayed locked on one silent space, the gap that remained. My sisters, Lena and Maya, the 2 pieces of my life still missing. The FBI agents explained that the files on the drive contained manifests and coded transfers related to Project Dandelion, a relocation protocol used by the syndicate to hide valuable assets. According to their interpretation, Lena and Maya had been marked under Dandelion 1 and Dandelion 2, but there were no dates, no locations, no clear endpoint, just a network of movements, initials, and drop points across 4 states. Then came the break. A call came through from an FBI contact working with international partners. A woman matching Lena's description had surfaced in Toronto, Canada, after being rescued from a private residence during a joint operation. She had no ID, no phone, and refused to speak to anyone for days, until one of the agents mentioned the name Michael Vale. She broke down and said one word, Aaron. I did not remember the drive to the airport. I did not remember the flight or the customs check or the ride to the safe house. I only remembered standing in front of a beige door on a quiet Toronto street, my fingers frozen just inches from the handle, my body shaking like it had not since I was a child. A social worker opened the door. She gave a kind smile and motioned me in. She's here. She's been asking for you. I stepped inside. The walls were quiet, the furniture minimal. In the far corner of the room sat a woman on the edge of a couch, her back turned, her hair pulled loosely behind her neck. In the moment she heard my steps, she rose slowly and turned. I froze. It was her, Lena, older now. Yes, older than I had last seen her. But those were still my sister's eyes, my mother's eyes, and they widened as she stepped forward, her breath catching in her throat. Aaron, she whispered. That was all. It took. We closed the distance, and she collapsed into my arms, sobbing, holding me like she had never expected to again. My chest cracked open, and I could not hold it in. I had searched for her my whole life, and now here she was, flesh and blood. Alive, we stayed there in silence, trembling in each other's arms, while the past we had both carried began to loosen its grip. Later, in a quieter moment, I sat across from her with coffee we would not drink and 1,000 questions I did not know how to ask, but she spoke first. They kept moving us. Separate buildings, separate names. They erased everything. For years, I didn't even remember who I was. Her hands shook, but Maya, she remembered. She never stopped remembering. My eyes locked on hers. She's alive. Lena nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. The last time I saw her was 2 years ago. We were held in the same house. They let us stay together for a few weeks. She had changed, but she was strong. She fought every day. Then one night they moved her. She was crying when they took her away. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Did she say where? No, Lena whispered. Only that the man who came for her had a ring, gold, with a black stone. She said he was important. I closed my eyes and saw the faces I had studied in case files. And then I remembered a name, one I had barely paid attention to, until now, someone buried in the network of shell companies. Rarely mentioned, never caught. A man tied to multiple offshore funds in the Dandelion files. A man with a signature, gold ring. His name was Victor Navarre. I turned to Lena. I think I know who took her. And this time, I was not going to let her vanish again. The last thread. What do you do when your final hope leads straight into the hands of the most dangerous man in the network? We left Toronto less than 12 hours after Lena told me the name, Victor Navarre. He had only been a shadow in the investigation up to this point, a peripheral figure, rarely mentioned, almost always protected by legal distance and offshore layers. But buried in the files my father had left behind were subtle references, coded deposits, encrypted contracts, and aliases that always traced back to the same entity, Navarre Holdings. What made it worse was Lena's description. The man who had taken Maya wore a gold ring with a black stone, a detail so small it almost sounded made up. But Victor Navarre wore that same ring in a photo attached to a classified Interpol report from 2012. That was the last time anyone confirmed his presence inside the United States. Since then, his name vanished from all official channels, until now. Rains was waiting for us at the FBI field office in Sacramento. He had been working through back channels, putting pressure on contacts in cybercrime and international trafficking divisions. Navarre was supposed to be dead, he said flatly. But you are not wrong. Someone with his old alias booked a private jet into Nevada 3 months ago. There is a compound outside Carson City listed under a shell foundation connected to at least 3 names from the Dandelion files. I did not blink. Then that is where we go. Lena looked at me, fear in her voice. If he's there, Maya might be too. Rains shook his head. You need to understand something. Navarre is not like Kincaid. He does not talk. He does not deal. If she is there, he will not give her up. Not unless you take her. We flew under aliases, landing in Nevada late the next evening. By morning, we were halfway into the mountains, driving a rented SUV up a winding, unpaved trail toward what was supposed to be a retreat center, an innocent front for something far older and far darker. When we reached the gate, there were no guards, no patrols, just a motion sensor, a camera, and silence. We parked off-road, covered the SUV in brush, and continued on foot. Rains led us through the tree line to a ridge that overlooked the property. Through binoculars, we saw the layout. 2 large buildings, 1 security shack, no movement outside. But Lena froze. Her voice cracked. That building. I've seen it before. That's where she was taken. She pointed to the smaller of the 2 structures. Brick walls, 1 narrow window, and a heavy steel door. She was crying when they led her in there. The 3 of us moved after dark. We bypassed the gate, cut across the gravel lot, and reached the outer wall. Rains jammed the lock on the security shack. No alarm, just old tech. We slipped inside the main property. The air smelled of concrete and damp dust. In the distance, faint voices echoed, too quiet to track. We split up, Lena and I went for the smaller building. Rains covered the rear, watching for movement. When I reached the steel door, I pressed my ear to it. I could hear something. Breathing, shallow, close. I looked at Lena. Stay behind me. I raised my foot and kicked. The old lock gave way on the second try. The door swung open into a room no larger than a cell, a thin bed, a sink, a chair in the corner. And seated in that chair, her head resting against the wall, was a girl. No longer the child I remembered, but not fully grown either. Her hair was longer, her frame thin, her eyes opened slowly, dazed. Then they focused. Her lips parted. Aaron, I could not move. My chest collapsed in on itself. Maya? She stood, stumbling forward. I caught her before she fell. You came, she whispered. You found me. Lena rushed in behind me, and the three of us clung to each other in that narrow, quiet room. I had spent 20 years trying to picture this moment, and still, nothing could have prepared me for it. Maya was alive. She had survived. But before we could get her out, the hallway exploded with sound, a shout, then gunfire. Rain's voice echoed from outside. Go move. I grabbed Maya's hand. Lena took the lead. We burst from the building into a storm of light and motion. 3 men came around the corner, armed, shouting orders. Rains took down the first. I tackled the second. The third was behind me, until a sudden voice stopped everything. Coldmeasured.com. That is far enough. We froze. Out of the shadows stepped a tall man in a dark coat. His face was lean, sharp, ageless, and on his hand was the ring gold band. Blackstone. Victor Navarre. He looked at me like he had already decided what came next. You are too late, he said, and he was not talking about Maya. We stood at the edge of the compound, wind cutting across the open lot, weapons raised, hearts pounding. Maya was barely standing, her body trembling in my arms, Lena clenching her jaw to keep from breaking, and standing across from us, calm, as if this was all preordained, was Victor Navarre, the man who had orchestrated the suffering of countless families, who had turned my childhood into a silence filled with unanswered questions. The gold ring, with the black stone, glinted under the floodlights. Behind him, armed men flanked both sides, but they had not moved. Neither had he. His eyes focused only on me. You think this ends here? He said quietly. That you can rip one thread out of the web and watch it all collapse. But your father thought the same. He died for that belief. I held Maya tighter. You're wrong. He didn't die for a belief. He died for his family. And now I brought them back together. Navarre smiled faintly, almost pitying. Then you truly do not understand. Your family was never the end. It was the beginning. He had one last file, one last key. My stomach dropped. What file? He tilted his head. The one your father never sent? The one we never found? The one that proves everything? Behind me, Rain's voice came sharp. Aaron, he's stalling. We need to move. Navarre raised one hand slowly, not reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pointed to a locked case beside him. It's in there, he said. Your father left it in a drop site we seized in 2006. We opened everything, except this. He paused. It's biometric. Your DNA is required. I stared at him. Why would he do that? Navarre stepped forward, and now I saw something strange in his eyes. Not power, not confidence, but fear. Because he knew the only way to protect the truth was to make sure no one could reach it until the time was right. And maybe that time is now. Everything around us froze. I stepped toward the case. Rains raised his weapon. Are you out of your mind? Lena grabbed my arm. Aaron, don't. He could be lying. I looked at both of them, then at Maya, then at Navarre, and I stepped forward. I placed my hand on the scanner. The case clicked. Inside was a sealed hard drive and a folded envelope. On it, my father's handwriting, shaking, rushed, but unmistakable. For Aaron, if this reaches you, I'm sorry. My hands trembled as I pulled out the note and read it aloud. I knew one day you'd come looking, and if you're holding this, it means I failed to keep you safe. But what I discovered was never just about our family. It was about hundreds more. This drive contains records from 23 years of corruption, trafficking, bribery, and murders, names, accounts, documents, everything needed to end them. I could not bring it to light, but you can. You must. I stared at the hard drive. Navarre watched with a hollow stillness. You now hold the end of us all. Sirens howled in the distance. Rain signaled to the sky. FBI teams, less than 2 minutes out, Navarre dropped to his knees. No resistance, no last stand, just silence. Because he knew it was over. Weeks later, the files on the drive led to arrests in 6 countries. For sitting officials, dozens of CEOs, the name Project Dandelion became headline news. Survivors were located, hidden assets were seized, but I did not care about the headlines. Not really. What mattered most was what happened when I walked through the door of a quiet house outside Seattle, with Lena and Maya beside me. We were not the same as before. We were something stronger. A family stitched back together, not by fate, but by truth. My father had died trying to protect us. My mother had died fighting for us, and I had spent 20 years refusing to let them become a footnote in a cold case file. Now, I was no longer searching. Now, I was home. Are you still watching? Did you stay with me all the way to the end of this journey? If so, you already know. This story deserves your like. This story deserves your voice, so right now, hit that like button. Subscribe to Unscripted Tales, and help us reach 1,000 likes on this story. Because the truth should never stay buried, and some families will never be erased. Thank you for watching.